Alright, half a day video. Yeah, really, probably no point. Try to just sum up or something, or recharacterize the conversation and why it degrades. Again, my accusation to you, Day, is that you are the one who engages in the rude and aggressive argumentation that's completely unfounded. It's essentially a slander to somebody's philosophy to characterize it as, you know, random or erroneous or arbitrary. And these are all, this strikes at the very core of the credibility of a philosophy, to use such a word. It's no better than calling it dogma or some other kind of shit. So to say that you aren't provoking a hostile encounter is just absolute nonsense. And in the context of the previous conversations, in which you haven't provided any alternative demonstration that any of the premises that went into these development of these arguments are at all flawed, or can be in any way discounted as not likely or founded reasonable premises. So you can hardly call something arbitrary that is premised. And the premises are pretty specific in terms of evaluating, these statements are not, there's nothing arbitrary about saying, there's a need. That need doesn't need to exist. That's not an arbitrary statement. It's quite an explicit statement. That the need doesn't exist because it serves some sort of need that exists in the environment or in the world. And so, that's not an erroneous or an arbitrary statement of its core value, its qualitative substance. All of these arguments, like I said, why go through them all again? I mean, we've already been through them all. Why the fundamental nature of why a negative sensation has more value than the positive sensation projection. Because the positive sensations are based on projections. The optimism is based on projections of value, where the negative observations are completely coherent, not to the satisfaction of an arbitrary addiction, but connected to the more absolute factual basis of, gee, it really sucks to die of AIDS. So the idea that vacationing is fun versus AIDS sucks, these are the qualitative statements, and they have character that can be diced out. It's not completely arbitrary, as you'd like to argue. So your simplistic statement is I don't understand, or it's arbitrary, and I'm just making the evidential argument that I don't think it's arbitrary, and I certainly, from my personal experience, see nothing arbitrary in my sensations. They are easily categorical. I mean, I can figure out whether I feel good or feel bad. I can certainly figure out whether I want to continue feeling a certain way. So there's nothing arbitrary about that. And connecting my consciousness to other people's consciousness is hardly an arbitrary thing to do. There seems to be a quite reasonable and rational connection between the snowflakes. They're all snowflakes. Consciousness is consciousness is consciousness. And the only thing that's different between our consciousnesses is this projected attitude, apportionment. And I'm saying that the apportionment that's based on reason, that doesn't see a distinction between a puppy and a pig, is a more rational premised argument than some philosophy that comes up with some sort of bullshit to say it's okay to torture the pig, but it's not okay to torture the puppy. To me, those are, you cannot come up with some sort of reason-based justification for those distinctions. You can only come up with bullshit rationalizations. But again, you're the one who decided not to have a civil conversation. You made two videos. In both these videos, you have degraded and offended the character of the arguments being made, the substance of the arguments, and you've ignored and effectively lied about the previous conversations and the context of those conversations. And why would anybody have respect for you for that? Why would anybody say, what, they're going to, like I said, your expectation is I was supposed to say, oh, thank you very much for your insightful analysis? What analysis? You aren't saying anything. You haven't refined your argument. You haven't come up with a better counter-argument. You haven't explained how evolution isn't just the evolution of parasitical organisms with stealing from each other, non-consensually taking all over the place. And again, all these arguments are important. The argument of imposition and the necessity of consent is an important argument. The argument that you don't have a right to, even if it's only a minority of people, to decide for them that you will torture them. That's perfectly within Kantian ethics to understand that you don't have a justification to torture for your ends unless you can demonstrate your ends with decisive evidence to be of high probability to produce something. And the argument being made is you can't prove a single affirmative action that isn't correcting a negative. There's not a single action that human beings can do that isn't correcting a negative that they could possibly justify causing harm for. Because the rest of it is just cupcake bullshit. The rest of it is just unnecessary gratifications of silly ambitions, silly addictions. You can't use a silly addiction to justify, it's like I say, in a heroin addict's need for the heroin justifies him whacking somebody over the head with a brick and stealing their money. That's the ethical equation you're attempting to say somehow has reason in it. There's no reason in that. And I think we've decidedly and decisively demonstrated that through these arguments, and you're the one who have ignored them, abused them, and abused the people making them. With this glib, non-responsive accusation that has no merit. Again, I could replay my Ephesus videos to your face and say, show me the arbitrary in there. I mean, to say it's an evasion, to point out the fact that we know what 90%, we know what side of the fence 90% of the stuff falls on, and 10%, yeah, sitting on some sort of ambiguous ground for which we don't have a perfect solution. You might call it, torturing animals in laboratories for medical cures. You could almost argue, well, this is a difficult question. You could even argue that slavery has some difficult components to it, in the sense that you could impose a lot of pain on a small number of people for a whole lot of human progress. But now we're back to the consensual argument and the fact that you really can't do that ethically. Even a utilitarian is going to tell you that the value equation still has to be justified in these absolute terms, and we're only giving you, we're only through pragmatism, not principle, would a utilitarian ever say it's justified. Because from their point of view, the straight line of not creating the need in the first place would be the logical conclusion. Don't make a mess, then you don't have a mess to clean up. But if you're going to insist on making messes, if the premise is the mess is going to exist, then yes, the utilitarian is going to have to deal with that circumstance by saying, well, it may well be. That it's better to destroy one individual entirely than to cut the arms off of 1,000. But that those are fence kind of issues. Allergy. So I don't have to go on too far, and my battery's getting low anyway. So anyway, look, you want to make videos on these subjects, you go right ahead, and I will play your videos, and I'll point out where you are committing slander and being abusive and being dishonest in what you're saying and how you're saying it. I'll call you on it, and I'll say it aggressively, because you're a dirty, rotten scoundrel in this argument. You've behaved shabbily, poorly, and I think you're disgraceful, despicable cheater. And that's my honest opinion, and I'm going to express it, and I'll prove it where necessary. Fuckhead. You're such a hypocrite. Because you talk about, don't, minor scratches, minor bruises, minor scratches. And you are such a hysterical, wimpy baby because somebody calls you an asshole. And instead of defending yourself with your empirical, brilliant argument, you just keep saying the same shit all over again. That somehow it's arbitrary to say there are enjoyable and unenjoyable states of being. And that the enjoyable ones are mostly not unenjoyable. As we went through this with the Benatar argument over and over and over again. This idea of not harm. Important concept. So anyway, till next time, and such.